Eric Clapton, the guitar god revered for his smooth, bluesy riffs and calm demeanor, finally breaking his silence on one of the most volatile and controversial figures in rock history, Ginger Baker. The iconic drummer of Cream, known for his explosive talent behind the kit, was also infamous for his fiery temper, relentless ego, and a trail of conflicts that spanned decades. Clapton's words strike like a bolt of lightning, shaking fans who had always seen Baker through the lens of his groundbreaking music rather than the chaos that surrounded him. Ginger Baker wasn't just another rock star. He was a man who thrived in the eye of the storm, creating it when none existed. His life was a symphony of brilliance and destruction, an unrelenting pursuit of perfection intertwined with bitter feuds, personal turmoil, and a penchant for self-sabotage that left even his closest allies exhausted. When Cream burst onto the scene in 1966, the trio of Eric Clapton, Jack Bruce, and Ginger Baker redefined what a rock band could be. But beneath the surface of their blues-infused masterpieces lay an uneasy alliance. Baker's relentless drumming drove the band forward like a thunderstorm, but his personality was another force entirely. Unpredictable, aggressive, and often impossible to control. Think of the tension in the recording studio, with Baker's impatient, domineering nature colliding with Clapton's quiet, introspective approach. Clapton, a man who valued precision and restraint, found himself locked in a constant battle with Baker's chaotic energy. Every jam session was a war zone, with Baker demanding control, his sharp tongue lashing out at anyone who dared challenge his authority. The backstage scenes were no better. Baker's escalating drug use and his relentless need to dominate every aspect of the band's creative process pushed Clapton to the edge. Clapton, exhausted by the drummer's volatility, began to question whether the magic they created on stage was worth the emotional toll. And yet, for all the madness, Baker's genius was undeniable. His polyrhythmic drumming was the heart of Cream, propelling them into rock immortality. If Clapton struggled with Baker, Jack Bruce's relationship with him was an all-out war. The two musicians, both brilliant in their own right, despised each other with a passion that often turned physical. Baker's disdain for Bruce's bass playing and Bruce's frustration with Baker's overbearing nature erupted into legendary clashes that went far beyond music. In one infamous incident during a live performance, Baker nearly came to blows with Bruce on stage, with their arguments turning into near fistfights behind the scenes. Baker's temper was legendary, and Bruce's refusal to back down only fueled the flames. The rivalry grew so intense that it contributed to the premature breakup of Cream in 1968, leaving Clapton caught in the crossfire, unable to contain the destruction. Even after Cream's demise, Baker carried his resentment for Bruce like a grudge tattooed on his soul, publicly criticizing him for years and reigniting their feud whenever possible. Despite occasional reunions, their relationship remained a ticking time bomb. Baker's confrontational nature didn't end with Cream. Throughout his career, he burned bridges with some of the biggest names in music. His stint in Blind Faith, the supergroup with Clapton and Steve Winwood, was short-lived, largely due to his overpowering presence and inability to compromise. Baker's obsession with being the dominant force led to tensions that made continuing the project impossible. Outside of bands, Baker found himself at odds with other drummers, particularly those he considered beneath his skill level. He famously dismissed musicians like John Bonham of Led Zeppelin, belittling their playing as overrated bashing. His abrasive critiques alienated him from many of his peers, reinforcing his reputation as one of rock's most difficult personalities. Even in the world of jazz, which Baker revered, he clashed with legends such as Art Blakey, refusing to acknowledge the influence of other drummers and constantly claiming superiority. His need to be recognized as the best was an obsession that often alienated him from opportunities and collaborations that could have further enriched his career. Ginger Baker's battles weren't just limited to his notorious clashes in the music world. His personal life was a relentless cycle of destruction, pain, and regret. Behind the furious drum solos and defiant public persona lay a man struggling to hold together the fragments of a life shattered by addiction, anger, and poor decisions. His relationships, whether with wives, children, or friends, were often casualties in the ongoing war he waged against himself. Imagine the scene: Baker, slumped in an armchair, a cigarette dangling from his lips, the tension in the room so thick it could snap. His marriages, once brimming with passion and promise, crumbled under the relentless weight of his volatile temper and self-destructive tendencies. He married 4 times, each union beginning with hope but ending in a familiar pattern of chaos. Fights that escalated into screaming matches, emotional wounds that refused to heal, and promises broken time and again. His wives, drawn to the enigmatic genius, soon found themselves trapped in a cycle of turmoil, forced to endure his mood swings, reckless spending, and addictions that consumed his better judgment. His children weren't spared from the wreckage. His relationship with his son, Kofi, was particularly strained, a heartbreaking reflection of Baker's inability to maintain emotional stability. Kofi, who followed in his father's footsteps as a drummer, often felt the sting of Baker's relentless criticism rather than his approval. For every moment of fatherly pride, there were 10 more of distance, disappointment, and estrangement. Years of resentment built between them like an impenetrable wall, fueled by Baker's stubborn refusal to acknowledge his failures as a parent. Despite earning millions during his time with Cream and other projects, Baker's financial life was as reckless as his personal one. Money slipped through his fingers like grains of sand, squandered on extravagant whims, impulsive investments, and a lavish lifestyle that he could never quite sustain. For every check that came in from album sales and royalties, there were mounting debts, bad business deals, and lawsuits waiting on the other end. Think of the Dream Ranch in South Africa, Baker's escape, his sanctuary, the place where he believed he could finally find peace. He poured everything he had into it, convinced it would be his refuge from the world. But his inability to manage money, coupled with his growing health concerns, led to disaster. Mounting debt forced him to sell the property, a crushing blow that left him financially crippled and emotionally devastated. Baker's financial troubles weren't just a personal burden, they became public scandals. Legal battles with creditors and former managers painted him as reckless and irresponsible. Bankruptcy filings became a recurring theme, each one stripping away more of the legacy he had fought so hard to build. The towering icon of rock's heyday was now a man struggling to keep the lights on, a sobering fall from grace that many saw as inevitable. The toll of Baker's hard-living lifestyle was not just evident in his career and finances, but in his very bones. Years of heroin abuse, smoking, and an aggressive drumming style that pounded his body into submission left him suffering from degenerative osteoarthritis, a condition that made even the most basic movements agonizing. His body, once an instrument of pure rhythm and power, was now a prison of pain and immobility. Yet, Baker being Baker, he stubbornly refused to seek help for years. He rejected medical advice, brushed off concerns from family and friends, and insisted he could still play despite his failing health. His pride wouldn't allow him to admit weakness, and he soldiered on, even as his hands trembled and his knees buckled under the strain. Picture the once fiery drummer, now confined to a chair, hands curled from pain, eyes darkened with frustration. The man who once ruled the stage with a primal force could barely walk without assistance, yet his mind still burned with the desire to create, to perform, to reclaim what his body had taken from him. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of Ginger Baker's personal struggles was that he was his own worst enemy. His fiery temper, his unrelenting stubbornness, and his refusal to accept help drove away those who cared for him most. Friends and collaborators, weary of his volatility, eventually distanced themselves, leaving Baker to face his demons alone. He was haunted by the ghosts of his past failed relationships, missed opportunities, and bridges burned beyond repair. He spoke of regrets but rarely acknowledged his role in them, choosing instead to lash out at the world that he felt had wronged him. Baker's life was a cautionary tale of how even the most extraordinary talents can be undone by their own self-destructive tendencies. Despite all the chaos, one thing remained certain: Ginger Baker was a survivor. He faced his demons with a stubbornness that was both his greatest strength and his ultimate weakness. Even as his health declined and his finances crumbled, he never let go of the belief that he was, at his core, a drummer, an artist, and a fighter. His personal struggles may have overshadowed his achievements, but they also humanized him, revealing the complexities behind the legend. Baker's story is one of brilliance and tragedy, a life lived at full volume with no apologies, no regrets, only the relentless pursuit of his art, no matter the cost. Beyond addiction and family struggles, Baker's life was peppered with scandals that cemented his reputation as one of rock's most controversial figures. His violent outbursts with journalists, his infamous threats against bandmates, and his legal troubles, including tax evasion and financial fraud, made headlines for years. Baker was a man who thrived on conflict, seemingly unable or unwilling to escape the cycle of destruction he created. Even in his later years, Baker's cantankerous nature never faded. Interviews became battlegrounds, with Baker lashing out at reporters, fellow musicians, and even fans. His final years were spent in self-imposed isolation, his legacy overshadowed by the very conflicts he refused to leave behind. Despite the turmoil, Ginger Baker's impact on music is undeniable. He revolutionized drumming, blending rock with jazz and African rhythms in a way no one had before. His technical mastery and fearless experimentation set a new standard for drummers across genres. Yet his legacy is one of contradictions. A man whose genius was rivaled only by his demons, whose brilliance was often overshadowed by his destructive tendencies. Eric Clapton's revelations about Baker only scratched the surface of a life that was as chaotic as it was groundbreaking. Ginger Baker's story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that talent, no matter how immense, is often not enough to overcome the personal struggles that define us. He remains a legend, but one whose legacy will forever be tinged with the scars of conflict and lost potential.